Cookies. You hear about them all the time. Almost every website you go to is using them, but a majority of us don't know what they are. When I made my video overviewing data collection and data breaches, I mentioned that cookies are little bits of information that are collected about you. But when I got really deep into the research for this video, I realized how little I actually knew. Oh my god, those things are heavy. To be able to fully understand these cookies, we need to go back to their origin. This story starts in April of 1993. CERN had just announced that the World Wide Web would be freely available for the world to use. They had been working on it since 1989 and felt that it was important enough to make sure that anyone could use it. CERN had prioritized that any system would be able to use it, calling it a Universal Linked Information System. The World Wide Web had a really neat advantage to it that other internet protocols at the time didn't. It could be seen outside of a command line, and it could even have pictures. To view these new web pages, a web browser needed to be used, and at the beginning, there was only Mosaic. Now again, this is the first of its kind, so it was not widely adopted at first. There were several reasons for this, most being its usability. It was known to be rather complex, both from a programming perspective and from a user perspective. The language that was used for the World Wide Web was HTML, which was still being adapted for mainstream use from CERN. In time, some people would come together with the goal of creating a new web browser, one that would be better and easier to use than Mosaic. They had the intention of making sure that it was also freely available for the public. Mosaic was also free, but there was certainly a trend of companies that were taking advantage of other internet protocols. Services like AOL and MSN would charge a subscription to be able to access internet-enabled features, such as playing games online. They would also charge a hosting fee, so both users and companies using AOL or MSN were getting charged, and AOL and MSN really liked that. Back in 1993 though, neither AOL or MSN had said if they were going to jump on the World Wide Web, giving this team a chance to set things right from the start. In April of 1994, they formed the Mosaic Communications Corporation, and they got right to work. The sixth person to be hired at this new company was Lou Montulli, who will be very important in this story. Lou was young, just fresh out of college. One of his first big breakthroughs at the Mosaic Communications Corporation, man, they gotta get a better name for that, was his idea of a persistent client-state object, as he called it. Up to this point, when you visited a web page, it couldn't remember who you were. Every page you visited was treated as the first and only time you had ever been there. This made navigating the web very limiting. For example, let's say you were trying to buy something online, but you wanted to continue to shop around and maybe buy a second item. As it was, when you went to look at the second item, the website had already forgotten you had looked at something else and assumed you just didn't want to buy it. Now, it's worth noting that this kind of situation had not occurred up to this point. Lou and the team were trying to think ahead because they knew that it was only a matter of time before people tried to sell things on the World Wide Web. Plus, they had a little history to assume this was true, as shopping had already existed with other internet protocols. So how could you make a website remember you? The first thought was to track the user's connection, but this came with a pretty big flaw. When you visit a website, it shows the IP address of who is connecting, which is enough to know that someone from, say, Denver, Colorado, is connecting to your website. If another person from Denver connected, the website couldn't determine if it was you or someone else. This wouldn't work as it wasn't specific enough to know if it's the same individual computer or not. So, Lou's big breakthrough idea was to put a small text file on the user's computer through the web browser. That file then could be looked at by the website in the future and see what the information was. A huge advantage to this is that it is stored on the user's computer, meaning it could just be controlled by the user. Don't want a website to remember you anymore? Just delete the file, and you'll be treated as a stranger the next time you visit the webpage on that website. As far as how it could handle shopping, when you add a new item to your cart, it'll either update that text file or it'll just generate a new one, but it will list out the items in your cart. That way, if you plan on buying those items, but you want to wait a few days, when you come back to the website, it'll remember all those items. No account needed. Pretty neat, right? This could even contain information about you, like your name or your shipping address, but you would have to provide that information first. Again, it was always a priority that you, as the user, have total control to delete anything at any time. As this technology developed, the name changed from Persistent Client State Object to just Cookie. The name came from, as Lou describes it, the term magic cookies, which he thought he got from a textbook from his college days, though he later said that he couldn't actually find that reference. He realized during the development that this could be abused. You see, the advertising industry was already a very big deal. Banner ads were already making their way into websites, and they were already becoming one of the biggest revenue streams for the World Wide Web. Lou and the team knew that if advertisers got their hands on all that data, they could use it to track people, so they started building in restrictions to avoid that. One of the most notable restrictions they added was limits to who could access cookies on your computer. They set it up so that cookies could not be accessed by anyone other than the website that created it, and they even allowed for cookies to be automatically forgotten after a certain period of time, when it made sense. They really wanted to make sure that this made the web a better experience without crossing the line of privacy. As development continued, their plan was to have the cookie feature in the first beta release of their web browser, called Mosaic Netscape. Meanwhile, in August of 1994, a fellow by the name of Phil Brandenburger had a mighty need for Sting. Let me explain. He was the first person to use the World Wide Web to make a purchase using the original Mosaic browser. This was the first sale as we think of it today, with entering a credit card number and everything. But he could only buy one thing. Remember, the invention of the cookie hasn't been released yet. That's just how things worked. So, what did he decide to buy in this historic moment? He bought this CD, 10 Summoner's Tales by Sting. This was such a big deal that there was even an article written about it the following day by the New York Times. This made people start thinking, maybe this World Wide Web thing could catch on. E-commerce could be a very big deal. The following month, the first beta version of Mosaic Netscape was made available to the public, and it had the functionality of using cookies. The only website to use it initially was their own, just to see how many people revisited it. And with the success of the beta, in November of 1994, the name of the browser and the company were changed to Netscape Navigator and Netscape Communications respectively, and the Netscape Navigator was released to the public for free. Now, this was a big celebratory moment, but there were some concerns still with the cookie. At that time, there were no standards regarding how websites should use it. Sure, there were some technical restrictions, like with websites not being able to see other websites' cookies, but they still needed to spell everything out for developers. In April of 1995, the process of standardizing the cookie began. The popularity of the browser had been doing quite well, but they felt that time was on their side. The people that were working on these standards had lots of other responsibilities as well, so while it was a priority, it was not the highest one at all times. While they worked on that, the other people using the World Wide Web saw the potential. They agreed that e-commerce, in fact, was a big deal, and some notable websites popped up during this time. GeoCities, Amazon, eBay, and even a handful of search engines had all been released after Netscape Navigator 1.0. What the heck is going on? Oh, hang on. Stupid Windows is why I use Linux. In October of 1995, Microsoft released their own web browser, Internet Explorer, which supported cookies as well. Microsoft also released FrontPage, a website creation application for Windows 95. In December, Adobe joined the party and released a similar website creation tool that allowed you to make websites without even needing to know HTML. Things were picking up a lot of steam very quickly, and even the team at Netscape had been busy with updates of their own, releasing Netscape Navigator 2.0. Progress on the standards for the cookie had been put on the back burner. I mean, they had to, given the speed at which things were evolving. That changed, however, in December of 1995, when Cohen Holtman, a Dutch computer scientist, had sent out a notice to the Netscape team that there was an exploit with cookies that could be wildly problematic for privacy. Here's what he found. Let's say we have two different websites, website A and website B. Website A really wants to use an image that is hosted on website B, so website A asks for a direct link to that image. When website B provides it, it is now technically contained within website A. What this means is that website B can place its own cookie within the website A domain, even if you've never been to website B. This meant that if a group of websites got together, they could share these files with each other, making a massive network of tracking. If they had 10 websites sharing all of these files, if you visited just one of these sites, all 10 would have cookies on your computer. Or worse yet, let's say you have 10 websites that all have ads from the same ad company. that ad company now has access to when you visit any of these websites, how long you visit for, what items you're looking at, what items you leave in your cart, what items you buy. This could be really problematic for privacy. Cohen added, "Someone is bound to try this trick, and it will, when discovered, generate a lot of bad publicity for the whole web." Shortly after, in February of 1996, an article in the Financial Times was published, written by Tim Jackson. The article was strangely ahead of its time, going on to describe much of what we've already learned in this video. I've linked it in the description if you want to read the whole thing, but essentially, this was the first time that the public had been made aware of the cookie, and its first debut was calling it out as a bit of a privacy nightmare. And to the credit of the author, Tim, he was absolutely right, but the worst was yet to be realized. You see, while Cohen was presenting his concerns and Tim was writing this article, internet advertising companies like DoubleClick and Engage were already very aware of this exploit, and they were hard at work to take advantage of it. By the time this article had come out, they had amassed banner ads across thousands of different websites, all sharing a common cookie. This process would soon be given a name: third-party cookies, and it was the exact privacy nightmare that everyone was worried about. The article lit a fire under the Netscape team to finish the standards as soon as possible. When they started looking into it after the article's release, they found out that DoubleClick and Engage had been pushing out third-party cookies very aggressively. This discovery forced the team to make a choice. Since cookies and third-party cookies were a functionality of the web browser, and given that Netscape Navigator was the most popular web browser of that time, they were presented with an opportunity to do something about the third-party cookies. There were three options that they came up with. Option 1, do nothing. Simply turn a blind eye to the use of third-party cookies and say that it's out of their control. This option would not sit well with most of the team, so they looked towards option 2, which was to block functionality of third-party cookies in Netscape Navigator. This one seems like a really solid option, as it would solve the privacy concerns, right? Well, Lou and the Netscape team took this entire situation very seriously, and they thought through all of the angles. Let's look at some of the pros and cons of this option. The biggest pro is something we just mentioned. It would solve the problem of third-party cookies in Netscape Navigator. However, the cons add up pretty quickly. First off, Netscape Navigator might not be the most popular web browser forever, and turning it off in this browser wouldn't force other web browsers to do the same. Second, advertising was one of the biggest sources of revenue on the internet already, and whether they liked it or not, it wouldn't go anywhere if they turned it on or off. In fact, those thousands of websites that had banner ads would lose revenue, preventing them from being able to continue running those sites in a lot of cases. Third, and probably worst, the genie was already out of the bottle. If they turned off the feature, advertisers would still be aware that this kind of tracking technology was possible, and they might be inspired to do something far worse. As Lou said, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Remember, cookies still had the advantage of allowing users to delete them if they so wished. If they upset the advertisers, they might be inspired to make something that users can't control at all, which would be a much worse situation. And lastly, the World Wide Web was still uncertain in its future. Internet protocols had been coming and going rapidly since the internet's inception, and the team recognized that by allowing people to make money on the World Wide Web, it was more likely to allow it to continue through the future. The World Wide Web was super important to these guys, as it was actually free and open for anyone to use it, and they really wanted to make sure that giants like AOL and MSN couldn't rip people off like they had been for all the other protocols. So, given the weight against option 2, they looked towards their final option: give users the choice. This would give people the power to choose if they wanted to be tracked or not, but even this came with its own decisions. Will third-party cookies be allowed by default, or will they be disallowed by default? The power of the default was already very known at this point. Microsoft's Internet Explorer was the default browser of Windows 95 and was already the second most popular web browser and was quickly coming to surpass Netscape Navigator. In fact, that action would eventually get Microsoft in a lot of legal trouble, but that's a story for another day. So, given the weight of the concerns from option 2, they decided to allow third-party cookies by default and allow users to turn it off as they wished. I really can't emphasize enough how insightful this team was, despite being a group of people mostly in their 20s. These were society-changing decisions that were put onto these people. I don't know about you, but I was kind of a dunce in my 20s, so all I'm saying is that it was an impressive amount of insight. And so, they decided to keep third-party cookies on by default in Netscape, but they allowed people to turn it off. In 1997, the standards were published, which heavily discouraged the practice of using third-party cookies. This was also the year that Netscape open-sourced their code and created a brand new nonprofit foundation called the Mozilla Foundation. The word Mozilla is actually a reference back to when Netscape was being developed. It means Mosaic Killer. They even had a goofy mascot and everything. Mozilla was the unofficial name of the browser before it got its official Netscape name. The following year, AOL bought Netscape for $10 billion in 1998 money. That's about $20 billion today, or about half of Twitter. This acquisition upset some of the Netscape team, and they would leave to make a new web browser under the Mozilla Foundation, Firefox. Shortly after that, AOL ceased production of the Netscape Navigator and laid off the remaining Netscape team. It's wild to me that all of what we just learned, the creation of Netscape, the invention of the cookie, the exploitation of the cookie, and the death of Netscape, all occurred within a 4-year window. I guess tech has always moved quickly. Now, there's one other thing that we need to discuss. Uh-oh. Remember how I mentioned that third-party cookies are the devil we know? Well, advertisers eventually created the devil we don't know, and it took much longer to come to fruition. Everything we've learned about up to this point has had complete control by the users, and while not all users cared what's being collected, or clear anything at all, it did at least have the capability. This new thing, though, it's completely outside of any user's control. Fingerprinting is the actual bad guy here. It's data that's being collected about you that you don't have a choice in at all. If you do figure out how to prevent that data from being collected, it is still able to identify you in a way, because most people don't try to prevent it. It's like wearing a ski mask to block your face. You're still there, they just can't see your face. The data collected here is actually something I misunderstood when I made the original data video. This website shows all the things that are collected about you. I wrapped that all into the context of cookies that are in that video. But I was wrong. That was fingerprinting data. It's tracking things like the device you're on, the location of your device, the types of cameras you have, how many microphones you have, how big your screen is, how big the window of the page you're looking at is, your web browsing history, whether you're using a VPN or not, what browser extensions you have, how much storage you have on your device, even how much battery is remaining, and more. And again, even if you figure out how to turn off that tracking, it will still identify that you aren't contributing to the tracking. I don't have many answers for fingerprinting, unfortunately. It's a topic of conversation that I'm still struggling to wrap my head around. I do know that some web browsers try to mitigate the impacts of it by either making you blend in with the crowd, where others just randomize all the data. There are also some extensions that can help minimize things, but again, that sort of can still be traced to some degree. I have some resources in the description that can help you figure out how bad your fingerprint is or not. However, I don't want to end this video on the dreadful note of fingerprinting. Looking back at how optimistic these guys were when building out the tools that would shape the World Wide Web was honestly inspiring, and it reminded me of a very important fact. Even today, despite these trackers existing on all big platforms, the internet is open to anyone to make anything. And a lot of that is thanks to those guys at Netscape for making the cookie. Websites don't have to have cookies, nor do they have to contribute towards fingerprinting. I know that things online today feel like they're all just a small handful of giant corporations ruling over everything, like Google, Meta, and so on. But those services are built on an open standard. You don't have to comply. You can make whatever the heck you want. Do you wish YouTube had fun channel backgrounds again? Make a website with backgrounds and embed your videos on that website. Do you wish forums were mainstream again? Go make one. For my website, I prioritized one thing. I want it to be how I want it to be. It's janky, sure, but it's mine. And I'm thrilled that people have found value within it. Whether it's the forum and people who love sharing pictures of frogs, or the privacy visualizer that got way more attention than I ever anticipated. I'm not a fan of tracking, so my website has no cookies, and I don't put ads on my site as well because I think that stuff sucks to look at, so I don't bother to put it there. And do you know what's cool? There are actual companies that are following this philosophy of rejecting surveillance capitalism. There is a great article someone shared on the forum recently with the president of Signal, which is a privacy-focused messaging app. I didn't know it at the time, but Signal is a non-profit organization, and they, like those Netscape guys back in 1994, are passionate about doing the right thing over the profitable thing. Things certainly can get murky, sure, but Signal has the advantage of knowing what could go wrong, like with what happened to Netscape. And they're not the only ones. Proton, of Proton Mail fame, is also a non-profit, and they are equally as focused on privacy. As dark and sad as things can seem online, just remember that there are people doing the right thing, and you're welcome to contribute however you see fit. Make a silly website, or advocate for privacy for those who might not understand it. The World Wide Web was designed to be free and open to anyone. Let's make sure we always remember that. Thank you for watching, and as always, please be kind and patient with each other.
Gonna reset my computer.